What's the scariest thing you have ever encountered? Went camping, had a bear play with my fake corpse. I was visiting Boston a few years ago, and we almost ran out of gas around 3 a.m. in Roxbury. I was a little tipsy and had just smoked. I was traveling with a friend and from out of town, so yeah, it was a party night for me. We stopped at literally the most sketch gas station I've ever seen with nobody around, and while my friend was pumping gas, I walked up to the window and asked for a vitamin water. The clerk walked back to get it, and for what seemed like the longest 5 minutes of my life, a random, homeless-looking guy began to approach me at the window. He was attracted to my e-cigarette and asking how it worked. I also had my iPhone in my other hand and noticed him gazing at it. As he was nervously asking me questions about the e-cig, I could see him scanning the area around him, almost nervous, almost desperate. I could literally feel him about to pull out a knife or gun or whatever he had in mind. I was kind of frozen, just stuck there wondering when he was going to strike. I was terrified, but trying my best to act casual. This dude was gonna rob me. I could feel it. Then, finally, the clerk re-emerged with the vitamin water, at the same time as my friend who was pumping gas, emerges as well, and everyone kind of looks at each other like, what's going on? I handed the clerk the money, got my change, and the sketchy dude kind of changed his demeanor and wandered off. As we got back into the car, my friend said that something seemed off. To this day, we joke about stabby, but the reality is I was traumatized. Haha. Meningitis. Laying in quarantine, waiting to die, not able to hug your kids or wife. Even hospital workers won't come into your room. I was in terrible pain, and knew that my family was suffering as well. The scariest thing was that there was nothing I could do about it, no one I could talk to, and no way to help them. 96 hours of staring at a wall, knowing that there's a better than 50% chance that I will die just lying here, discarded. P.S. Not dead yet? It was 8 years ago. I don't live in the best area, and a dude got shot in front of my house on Thanksgiving a couple of years ago. My mother and I ran outside to give him a towel, so he could tourniquet his leg while the ambulance arrived and the thugs who shot him came back to demand that we stop helping him. My mother is a very impulsive person and doesn't back down easily, so she started arguing with the thug, telling him to go away and asking who he thought he was, etc. Normally, I would be all for my mother to stand up for herself, but the dude was pointing the gun at her, which meant that I had puff up my chest and stand between him and my mother, and join my mother screaming at them all to go away, like mother like daughter, tell them I wouldn't let them talk to my mother that way, and that they'd already shot the guy and done what they set out to do in hopes that they would leave. They did leave after a few minutes of intense screaming on both parts, but, man, being held at gunpoint because I didn't want anything to happen to my mother was one of the most nerve-wracking things to ever happen to me. I was shaking for hours afterwards. A train derailing and landing 10 feet from my house. When I was 8, I was on a day trip with my cousin, uncle, grandfather, parents and siblings. We were having ice creek in a reserve/park area. The previous day it rained quite heavily, so the creek was nearly overflowing. My cousin, siblings and I decided to race stick boats under one of the low bridges. The water was only about 5 centimeters from the top of the bridge and was actually higher than the arcs allowing the water through. As a result, the water was being forcibly sucked under the bridge. In an effort to get an edge on me and my siblings, my cousin, who for the record was older and bigger than me, leaned out over the water and fell in. Somehow, I managed to catch him as he hit the water, and so I managed to keep him above the water even though his legs were being sucked under the bridge by the current. I had my arms under his arms and was lying down on the bridge on my stomach. The force of him pulling on me stopped me from moving, and because I was on my stomach the pressure stopped me from talking as I was struggling to breathe. This was the scariest moment I have ever experienced. I had my cousin's life in my hands, but there was nothing I could do. I couldn't hop to lift him, he was too heavy for me even without the extra force of the current. I couldn't call for help because I could hardly breathe. The look in his eyes when he tilted his head back. He was pleading for help that I couldn't give him. After what seemed like an eternity, one of my siblings called to our parents, and after seeing what was happening, my uncle wet man mode, jumped into the creek, the water was up to his midsection, and pulled my cousin to safety. I'm sure the whole ordeal took no longer than a minute, but it felt so much longer. After that my cousin and I became quite close. Even after he became reclusive and depressed, he was always willing to talk to me. Something happened to my brother and I, not quite the same though. We were in a water park in Spain, Aqualandia I think it's called, back when he was 2 and I was 6. This'll have been 13 to 14 years ago now. One of the pools was full of these pedal boats. I was pushing my brother around in one of them in the kids' pool. What I'd failed to realize is it connected onto the adult pool with a sheer drop. I hadn't seen the drop. Got right up to it, my brother got out of the boat. Sploosh, sunk. I panicked and grabbed his hand but I couldn't lift him up. My mom ran over, she was watching from the side of the pool while we were playing with the boat. She grabbed my brother out of the deep side of the pool and pulled him out. If I'd not grabbed his hand so quick he'd have been pulled away and would have drowned before my mom got to him. Something happened in my family. We were tubing on the Guadalupe River, and it had rained quite a bit in the days before we got to our camp, so the river was up and running fast. At one point there were a bunch of trees in the river that had huge root systems, cypress trees I think? Anyway, the river was running so fast that it was sucking water right onto those roots. As we got close, my husband realized the danger and told all of us to start paddling for the shore to get out of the water. My youngest brother couldn't make it, and my husband swam out after him. Hubby managed to grab him just as he was sucked under the tree and pulled him to safety. If my husband hadn't been there, my brother would have died. My son went missing for an hour and a half. We had the police, fire department and like 70 neighbors searching everywhere for him. They tossed our house searched in the woods. Finally one of our neighbors points to our bedroom window and says, "Is that him?" He was hiding somewhere in the house. He fell asleep. He was 3. My brother went missing as an 18-meter/0, he was very mobile, while we were in our yard. My dad went running around the neighborhood trying to find him. My mom and I was 7, searched our yard and the street we lived on. It felt like forever but it was probably only 15 minutes when I found my little bro. He had wandered into the garage and climbed into his stroller. My older brother, who was deaf and was about 5 at the time, walked away from my parents at Disneyland. My mom went looking for him while my dad watched the rest of the kids, including me. When my mom returned with my brother after about 15 minutes they noticed I wandered off as well. My mom was very worried because it was a part of the park with lots of water everywhere, like little lake things and water attractions. And I was only about 2 years old at the time. Luckily I was wearing a dog tag with my name and my parents' phone number on there, so they got a call from a man who had found me wandering around. My mom was very pissed off at my father and I had to be in my stroller the rest of the time we were there. My son, who was about 3 at the time, did something like that. My husband was asleep because he worked nights and I was in the kitchen cleaning up. I thought he was in the living room playing. I realized he was being quiet and went to see what he was doing. He was gone. I searched the house. I yelled for him. Nothing. I got this feeling to look outside. I walk out there and hear someone talking. I walk towards the front of the house and see 2 cars stopped, one woman on the phone with 911, one woman looking around and my son jumping up and down laughing in the front seat of one of their cars. They asked if it was my son. I said yes and grabbed him and walked back in the house. Woman on the phone tells them I'm there. Took almost an hour for me to stop shaking from the nerves. Really wish I had thanked them for grabbing him. I was so shook up I couldn't say anything. I believe he was trying to walk to his grandmother's 2 houses down and across the street. Could have been much worse. When my brother was 2, he and I were coloring in my grandparents' front room. Without me noticing, he managed to open the front door and leave. My grandparents live on a very busy road, so the second we saw he was missing, my dad ran out into the road and stopped the traffic asking if anyone had seen him. Lady in a car pops her head out and goes, "There's a little boy running towards town." When Dad caught up with him, he was sprinting down the road towards the park as fast as a 2-year-old could go. Thought he'd get in some cheeky swings time. Talking on the phone with long-distance girlfriend. Weird pause in convo. She sounds confused but says she thinks her roommates are home, wasn't expecting them that early. Hear her call out the roommates' names to see if it's them, then next thing is a loud crash and a scream, followed by a bit of a commotion. She yells somebody is in the house and we disconnect. I Google the local police department and try to explain the situation to them, while anxious to get back on the phone with her. Probably a minute later and we are back on the phone and she is at the neighbor's house with police arriving a few minutes later. It turns out it was a few high schoolers playing a prank on the roommate. They were in the house and didn't realize my GF would be there, pushed her down on their way, rushing out the house once they heard her there. They ran out and fled one way, She fled to the neighbors out the other door, obviously way more scary for the GF than for me, but that minute when we were off the phone and I had no idea what was happening and nothing I could do was definitely scary. I was house sitting for my parents. The bedrooms are upstairs and at night their 2 dogs get locked up in a room in the basement. I woke up to the dogs making a bunch of noise, so I ran downstairs to quiet them down. On the way back up I noticed the front door was open. Not like unlocked but physically open. I was by myself in this big house and the dogs had just been barking and I was terrified. I ran back to my bedroom and called my boyfriend, who drove across town at 3 a.m. to come and search the house with me because I was too afraid to move. We found nothing and nothing seemed to be missing or out of place, so I have no idea what happened. Thinking about it now, I'd guess that the dogs barking scared them off. King brown snake slithered right across the path in front of me while I was walking up a large mountain by myself. I probably would have been close to death by the time I reached the bottom if he tagged me. Late one night when I was about 15, my best friend and I were outside of my house on the curb sneaking cigarettes, sharing a beer. You know, usual rebellious teenager stuff. Now my housing development is kind of large and surrounded by woods, and I happen to live right near one of the corners, so to say, of the neighborhood, so the houses across the street from mine all have woods behind them. All of a sudden we hear a terrifying screeching sound coming from the woods directly across from us. We both booked it inside, leaving our beer and pack of smokes on the street. Her and I both said we thought it was a chupacabra, only because the sound was so out of this world. The windows in the front of my house weren't covered by the curtains, and we felt like we were still being watched inside, so we closed them. Here's the bad news, our parents were kind of hands-off, so her and I walked everywhere. We were now faced with the struggle of me walking her home, which meant all the way out of my neighborhood, then through a larger neighborhood with big spaced-out houses, then a shortcut through some woods over a makeshift bridge that cut into her condominium development, about a 20-minute walk, all uphill, in the pitch black. Still shitting our pants, we waited a good 30 minutes before beginning the walk, thinking we'd be in the clear by then. Nope. We felt we were being watched the entire time. We kept hearing noises behind us, leaves crunching, twigs snapping, footsteps etc. So all freaked out we finally reached the woodsy shortcut to our neighborhood. Now at that time I had an Verizon cell phone, hot shit at that time lol, so I flipped it open to provide us light for walking through the shortcut. About halfway through, her and I see 2 huge green eyes that were near as tall off the ground as us. At that point it was fight or flight for both of us, so we parted ways and I ran as fast as I could the entire downhill trek back to my house. The whole time I was convinced I would lose balance and trip and get eaten alive, but thank God I made it home in one piece, albeit scared shitless. Being a bit older now, a logical explanation would be that we were being hunted by a cougar. The scream, stalking behavior, the eyes were feline in nature. However, I live in Orange County, New York, and there reportedly are not supposed to be any mountain lions left here since the 20th century. Whatever it was, we both felt like prey that night and it inspired both of us to always carry mace, to this day. I have a really big fear of someone breaking into my house / kidnapping me. Once I go home from school and my front door was open and it looked like it had been busted. I thought my mom was moving some stuff and went to find her. I also heard some rummaging from the back of our house. When her car wasn't in the garage I called her and she said she hadn't been home since that morning. I hauled ass to my neighbor's house and called the cops. They came and checked it out, but didn't find anything. I didn't sleep for like a week. I was staying at my family's old motor court, 8 Depression-era cabins lined up down a driveway, with a friend when we were around 13. We decided to go stay in the very last cabin, far away from everyone to have a little private girl time. Just as we were getting ready for bed, someone knocked on the door. I said, "Yeah?" thinking it was my family bothering us. No response. They knocked again. I said, "Yeah?" again, a little more impatiently. What did my family want? "Yeah? Yeah?" An unknown male voice mocked me from the porch. "Open the door." My blood froze. He sounded angry, aggressive. It's hard to explain how he sounded. He definitely wasn't here to sell magazines. The door was locked, but it was just a flimsy old chain lock. The windows were unlocked. We didn't dare go near the door or front window to see them, and we didn't respond, not wanting to make them more angry. We crawled into bed with the lights on. The light switch was next to the door, and realized we could hear their car running next to the cabin. in a spot that would definitely be hidden from my parents' sight and from view from the road. We stayed in bed, holding each other in terror. I could hear them talking quietly to each other on the porch. I eventually fell asleep, but my friend stayed up until she heard them start smashing bottles and drive off. In the morning, we left the cabin and found all of the chairs in a circle around the door, and a couple of beer cans. Who knows if they just wanted to freak out a couple of kids, if they thought we were someone else, or if they had more sinister plans. It was several years before I was willing to stay in that cabin again. And even then, it was because my boyfriend at the time was with me. My parents are at the age where this kind of thing happens more and more. About every other year my mom or dad take turns having a hospital stay. A few years ago I was busy with school when this happened to my mom. Turns out she has to have an operation, but no one seems overly concerned. Okay, doesn't sound like a big deal. I'll head to the hospital before my class. When I get to the hospital it's just casually mentioned in passing that she has cancer. Yeah, cancer, which had already spread from her ovaries to her intestine. She had to have a hysterectomy and partial duodenectomy, and my sister and I had to go into the prep room to wish her farewell. So in a split second I'd gone from worrying about school stuff to suddenly maybe seeing my mom for the last time, and I had to face her while sort of pretending that I already knew the seriousness of the situation so that I didn't look like a bad son or something. This was a week or more after I'd found out she was sick. My family's so weird and afraid to talk about serious matters that they didn't mention she had cancer. Even worse, I had an important presentation later that afternoon that if I didn't show up to I could fail the class, so I had to leave while she was still in the OR. Not only that, but I was the one who was leading the presentation, had put together the presentation, had the PowerPoint files with me, and still had to rehearse with my group or else they wouldn't know what to say. And I don't exactly enjoy public speaking. So on the same day that I found out my mom had cancer and was having a life-threatening operation, I had to lead this stressful presentation not knowing if my mom was dead or alive, and this had all been sprung on me mere hours earlier. Also, on the way to my class I got pulled over by the police, but I don't even want to go into that. P.S. The operation went fine and she's been in remission since. Last year she got her chemo poured out, and she didn't suffer any chronic side effects from the operation or the chemo. Strangely, it's almost like it never happened. As shitty as the whole thing was, I count my lucky stars every day that we all got the best possible outcome. It could have gone much, much worse. Treasure your time with your loved ones because it can happen out of nowhere to anyone at any time. About a month ago, I was lying in bed and could hear my dad moaning from his bedroom. Thought he was having diarrhea or something, but it kept going on and getting louder, which was starting to freak me out. After maybe 10 minutes, he bangs on and opens my door, and tells me to call the cops and that he needs to go to the hospital. Has practically crying, and drenched in sweat, hunched over, and yelling and moaning. My fright goes pretty much from 0 to 100. My dad is normally a pretty tough cookie when it comes to pain, so this was wildly unusual. Shitting my pants, I called the cops, and I swear an ambulance and fire truck and everything shows up in like 2 minutes. My dad had gone out to the front porch to wait for them, and my mom sees the condition he's in, and she starts getting hysterical. Both my mom and I have bad anxiety, so boy we were in bad shape. He gets whisked away, and we're gonna head to the hospital after them, but first I call out of work, and break down crying on the phone with my boss since I have no idea what is wrong with my dad. So my mom and I head to the hospital, and I see the ambulance from our town, and I swear I saw a gurney covered in a cloth or something, and I'm like OFCK Hested. But when we head inside, they direct us to where he is in the ER. We were there for hours, with him crying and being delirious in pain, although once the doctors started checking him out I started calming down, since I was pretty sure he wasn't in mortal danger. Anyway, he ended up being stuck in the hospital for 2 weeks with one of the worst cases of pancreatitis his doctor had ever seen. Walking on the sidewalk one night. Out of nowhere a car comes speeding past me on my right. The road was on my left. It hit the barrier pretty hard, barely missed me, and kept hauling ass down the road ahead of me. I woke up in the middle of the night and opened my eyes. My bedroom was very dark, but I could still make out a figure standing next to my bed. I live alone. With a huge rush of adrenaline I realized that there was an intruder in my apartment, and I was in mortal danger. I figured that it was probably a burglar looking for valuables. I decided that it was best to lie still as if sleeping, and wait for him to leave. Then the intruder said with an amused voice, "Time to wake up." It was a moment of pure terror. I've never felt such panic. It was like all the alarms went off in my head at the same time. My fight-flight reaction kicked in and I wanted to kick and punch and scream. But I couldn't move. I knew I had to fight for my life, but I was paralyzed. I just lay there, staring at the figure hulking over me, trying to force my limbs to move. And then suddenly I snapped out of it. The figure disappeared, and everything felt different. I realized that there was no intruder. I had just experienced an episode of sleep paralysis. My twin sister having her first seizure. I was showering and heard a weird noise, sort of like a very distorted hum, outside the bathroom door. Sister and I were getting ready for school at like 6 a.m., and thought it was her playing a prank. Heard the sound again, and became slightly creeped out but investigated to find my twin face down having a seizure. I didn't know what was happening at the time, as I was pretty young. My younger teen mind thought she was dead. When I was 14 to 15 I used to walk at around 6 a.m. before I started work at my fast food job on weekends. I was walking around a corner when I saw a man staggering around, walking really erratically, completely white and covered in blood. From a distance I thought he was a random drunk, but he walked in my direction. Totally thought he was a zombie and I was about to die, when he slurs out something like, "Do I have any scars on my face?" I was like, "What?" He stumbled past me. I didn't really know what to do, so I kept walking. A couple minutes later I come across an upside-down car in a flower bed outside a house, guessing he just rolled the car while drunk and was fleeing. Worked night shift alone at a fairly secluded gas station off the highway. I was used to seeing weirdos, so I wasn't bothered by working alone. The cooler in the place was situated to where if you left the door open, you could hear the bell ding over the door if someone came in. I was stocking the cooler one night, as we just had a delivery from either Pepsi or Coke, can't remember. The door dinged, so I go out into the front of the store to wait on the customer. Before I get into this story any further, let me tell you this. I am a female, 5 tall even, and I am not a fighter at all. I couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. So when I seen maybe 6 or 7 huge biker dudes, just standing there and looking at the store itself like they were casing the joint out, I get worried. I go behind the counter, and they just stand there. One dude spoke up and asked when my shift ended, then started asking if I was there alone, if we were very busy the time of night, etc. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know what to say or do. I was absolutely terrified. They all start looking around, at nothing particular, just acting weird. A car pulls in, and this dude in a long tan coat comes in. He gets a bottle of pop, comes up to my register. I was so nervous. When I took the dude's money, I was shaking. Dude notices, and asks if I'm okay. I shook my head no, and looked over at the biker dudes. The tan coat dude looks too, and realizes these dudes are probably up to no good. Tan coat smiles, and says only to where I can hear, "Honey, I'm a cop. I'll stay here with you till you're okay." Pulls open his coat, shows me the badge on the inside of it. Then tan coat stands there and acts like he knows me, asking about my mom, saying stuff like, "Crooked, are you ready for the family reunion?" Shit like that. Biker dudes get done looking, and exit the store. Tan coat dude says, "I'll be back. Hang tight." Goes out, gets in his car. I see him talking on the phone, comes back in, tells me he'd called the police for these dudes acting suspicious, and that I would like an officer to check on me every so often throughout my shift, and he gave them the info about the biker dudes in case they'd done anything sketchy. An officer came by every hour or so that night until I left, and everything was okay. It was just something about the biker dudes that absolutely terrified me. Tan coat dude likely saved my life that night, just by doing what he done. The thought that I could have been robbed, shot or whatever and left there alone till next shift come in terrified me. The first night I went camping with some friends, we had a cougar prowling in our camp. They got a hold of an animal and we thought it snagged one of the little kids. That primal feeling of being prey sunk in for a moment. Dunno if encountered is the right word. I got shot in the chest. For a period of time I can't quite pin down, but something between 1 and 5 minutes I was full on last moments panicking. I always thought I would be so much more composed about dying, but I was a crying mess until I was repeatedly assured that I was okay by someone I trusted. Either that or losing the sight in my left eye, and grappling with the fear of losing the remaining vision in my good eye. I used to have to dial into my university's phone system to obtain my grades. The system was called Tex and it has a southern accent that was sometimes hard to make out. It would say things like History 108 you received an A as in apple. The scary part was when it would say something like Calculus 302 you received a D as in boy. Son, you scared me out. Today grades are online. Gotta love the internet. Near miss, 100 yards, from an F3 tornado at night. Even if you are watching the news/radar, the first sign you'll get is probably hearing it. A dull roar/howl growing in volume, adding in the sounds of debris hitting as it passes, then all of it cutting off pretty abruptly. All you can do is sit there and pray you don't have a tree fall on you or the house disintegrate. Fortunately we only lost the fence and had some minor roof damage. Tornadoes at night are the single most terrifying thing I have dealt with more than once. It's dark, so you can't even tell where it's coming from. Then you hear the rumble and cracking of tree branches, so you run to a safe area inside. My son was 3 months old during the last tornado we had, and I wrapped him in a blanket and laid over him in case the windows busted. The eerie creaking and the sound of the doors getting pulled in their frame was sickening. When the tornado hit our house I was actively watching the storm warnings on TV and wondering how much time we had. That's when I learned there is a lag of several minutes between a tornado's actual position and where your local weather guy says it is. One of my children pointed out the window and screamed, "Daddy, look!" And we raced to crowd into our designated closet as the tornado hit us. We were lucky to survive a direct hit with just damage to the house and trees in the roof. The storm strengthened as it moved knee, destroying a hospital and killing a bunch of people. Had it already been at full strength when it hit us, my family's survival would have been doubtful. As it is, we were lucky to feel just the tail of that devil as it first began to gouge its path across our state. Get in your shelter sooner than you think you need to be there. The news is reporting where the tornado has recently been and where they think it is headed next. What they are reporting as the tornado's position, while useful, is already out of date for storms that move at these speeds. I was trapped at work during an F3 about 5 years ago. It destroyed the neighborhood behind us, and most of the town we were in. I worked in a hair salon and we locked ourselves in the bathroom with 4 customers. One little girl ended up with PTSD from the whole thing. The noises it made were insane. It sounded like someone was vacuuming the roof. Some drunk punk pulled a gun on me and my friend in a bar parking lot after he had an argument with my friend's boyfriend. We were like 30 feet away from him and he ran to his car and came running to us, pulls out his Glock and says, "I don't give an F, I'll kill you both right now." I turned around and looked up at the sky and said to myself, okay, this is it. This is how I'm gonna die. His friends were telling him to chill out and let us go away. He didn't show his face or car for 3 weeks after, and I think someone talked to him telling him that he potentially faces prison time for that dumb stunt. My friend said that since then he apologized to her profusely. I didn't press charges and I don't want anything to do with him or that bar. Let's just state it out that I'm terrified of heights. So my family goes on vacation and my dad gets us to go on a gondola lift. The initial climb up isn't that bad and there's a midway stop area with a beautiful view of the mountains where you can go out. We reach the top sometime later only to get told that we have to turn back due to extreme wind conditions that are developing. Everyone is evacuated and the gondolas are packed full in order to speed things up. My family shares the ride back with 2 kind old ladies. About 5 minutes into the ride down, the gondola stops. We don't know what's going on, but the wind is harsh enough you can hear it swaying the gondola back and forth. It was pretty intense for everyone, lol. Hundreds of feet up on a little metal box that's swaying back and forth. We figured it was too windy to safely proceed and so they had to stop. About 10 minutes later we start moving again, only to stop maybe a minute later. After a bit more time, we finally start moving again and made it back to land. On the bright side, we got to hear about the 2 old ladies and their stories. They had been friends since elementary school. Pretty insane. I saw a guy lying on the ground in the park one day. He looked dead or, if alive, very sick. I knelt down for a closer look to help him and he suddenly jumped to his feet screaming unintelligible nonsense. I jumped back, startled, and he came at me. I turned and ran like the wind and he gave chase. He stayed right behind me at a full sprint for a minute or two but he finally dropped back. I ran into a store near the park, but he didn't come after me. Hiking along a hillside in Scotland with my wife, we found a really nice clear sandy path through the vegetation. Oddly, it started to get progressively wider and pretty steep. Then I suddenly realized it isn't a path and immediately called to my wife to stop where she is and start slowly backing up. Turned out there were subsidence spread zones. The whole hillside was in the process of becoming a landslide. Maybe now, maybe next week, but inevitably and sometime soon. Just a little farther we would have been in a spot we couldn't get out of safely on our own or easily died. When I was around 6 years old, I was playing in the woods with my friends. As I was running through the woods, I tripped on a root and fell onto an exposed pointy tree stump. The stump impaled my neck and I was just laying there in shock. I tried to get up, but the stump was stuck in my neck and still attached to the ground. Finally my friends helped me up, which now that I look at it was probably not the best idea, and my parents took me to the hospital. Missed my esophagus by an inch. When I was in 8th grade, an F4 tornado hit our town. We were on the school bus home. It suddenly got so dark the street lights came on, then all went off at once as the wires snapped. As it pulled up to our house, pebbles from the farm across the street started blowing into the bus. My younger sister and I got off the bus and were basically blown to the garage, which was closest, with small branches hitting us. We huddled under a car with my mom until it was gone. I'm afraid of large animals, and one time I had 3 horned cows following me from a meadow where they were grazing into a wooded area where I was trying to get rid of them. I didn't think they would follow me through the woods, but they did, and I was shitting my pants the whole time while trying to find a path and get out of the woods. The only way out seemed to be the same as the way in, because the rest of the ditches that surrounded the woods were full of water. But I couldn't go back, because the cows were there. Eventually I found a path and got out of there. For a while I was terrified and tried to calm down. Later, I started to feel bad about leading those animals into the woods, because I don't know if they later got out of there okay or if their owner found them. I realized that they probably were just curious, but I was so scared I thought my heart will stop at one point. Mortality, after seeing my sister in hospital several times. The first time was a car accident. She was driving along a bend, and turned to see if her whimpering dog in the back seat was okay. She hit the guard and flipped over the railing into a ditch. She had to crawl out on her hands and knees, and was only saved that night because an ambulance just happened to drive by. The other time happened shortly after the accident. She went through a period of deeply believing she was meant to die in that accident, and it effed with her pretty deeply. We received a call from the hospital. She had driven her car to an empty car park and downed an entire packet of antidepressants, a packet of sleeping pills and some other stuff I can't remember the name of. If it weren't for my other sister finding her at the last minute, she would have died in a car park, while I was a mere hour away. Love the people you have, you never know when you might lose them. When you don't feel the next stair under your foot and it feels like the entire world is falling out from underneath you. Horrifying. A good amount of things. Especially health-wise. Being told I have so many months to live through strokes and heart attacks. Having open heart surgeries and being told I might not make it off the table. So I picked my death dress and goodbye letters to my loved ones. And a fire that happened when I was home alone. A candle was lit and was too close to the curtain. I left for maybe a minute. I saw the curtains on fire. I was stuck. But called 911. I remember getting shoes and a coat. The fire truck's coming. Then I'm in a kitchen I've never been in. I still don't know how I got there. I was almost 15 at the time. 13 years ago, I still have chunks of time missing from that. I was gaming past midnight on our second level, sitting in the kitchen with our deck behind me. My dog was laying on the ground next to me when he started to whine and look at me and look right behind me through the deck door. I'm trying to get him to be quiet, so I figure I'll open the door and show him nothing's there. I was wrong. I saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at me. Turns out a Newfoundland that lived down the street was just chilling in the middle of winter on my deck, just staring inside because he wanted to play with our dog. My youngest, when he was 10 months old, struggling to breathe and turning purple as he choked on one of his older brother's toys. Thank my lucky stars I'd done a first aid class. My dad is a bad diabetic, so sometimes he would act like another person when his blood sugar dropped. He was acting crazy one day and I was sick of it, so I told him I was leaving with my friend since I was worried he was going to hurt me. Then he got his gun out and swings it around, threatening to kill the guy. I pull out my phone to record him to show him later, and tell him that better be empty when he points it at me. I'm a pretty small girl, Hess got it a few £100 on me and was a very high ranker in judo tournaments nationwide, back in the 80s, but he could still kick ass, so if he wanted to kill me, he would. He cocks it to the left slightly just before it goes off. The sound of it made my ears ring so badly and I had tunnel vision for a minute, so I didn't know whether or not I had been shot. The sound it made vibrated through my whole body, and I swear I felt the air from the bullet. He thought it was empty, but there was one in the chamber. It went off about 5 inches from my head, and got it on camera. We both started crying. He kept saying he was sorry and he would get help. I still left and told my mom. She picked me up later and they had a long talk. I deleted the video but not before I showed it to my brother so he could witness how close I was to getting my head blown off. After that, he did get help, and I'm almost glad that happened since he hasn't laid a finger on me since. I'm 21. This happened when I was 18. There's this giant dirt pit between my old apartment and the grocery store. I used to cut through it all the time. One night, I was walking through it as usual when I saw a figure following me through the nearby forest. It was really strange. He wasn't close to me, but he was keeping my pace exactly. It was dark enough that you could only see him when he walked past the gaps in the foliage, so it was like watching someone move through black shutters. I was going to write it off as some weird, creepy coincidence when he suddenly turned to me and called out, in a sing-song voice, "I'm gonna catch you." He sped up, long, loping steps and swinging arms. A couple years ago, during a high school orientation, we were all assigned upper year students to give us survival tips. Most students talked about the importance of doing your homework, how to organize your notes, things like that. Mine did not. Mine spent the whole time explaining what to do if someone was trying to kill you. So, her voice in my head, I kept walking. I didn't run. She'd told me that would just make him excited about the chase. I headed towards the lit path ahead, where my university had set up safety poles that would dial 911 with the press of a button. I tried not to think about the fact that I was trusting my life to the wisdom of a 15-year-old. He was cackling and singing the whole time. It was, weirdly, the calmest I'd ever been. After what felt like an eternity, I reached one of the safety poles and he dropped back and went away. I'd assumed that I'd exaggerated the length of the event in my head, but when I went back the next day and retraced my steps, I realized that he'd been following me for at least 10 minutes. This isn't paranormal, but it was concerning. My car broke down in the middle of the night in a shitty area of Akron, Ohio. I got off the highway limping it until I found a dirt lot to pull off in, with smoke pouring out everywhere. I was also holding drugs, so police involvement was not a good idea. There was a car parked a good distance away in this dirt lot, and two of the most ragged, sketchy-looking people I've ever seen get out and start approaching me and my fiancée. She's from Ireland, and about to get her first experience with American crackheads, both this dude and his, apparently. Baby mama had less than 4 visible teeth, their skin was gray and abscessed. They seemed nice, honestly, but I was waiting for them to try some sketchy shit. You've got a guy wearing decent clothes and a European immigrant with no means of escape. It'd be a perfect robbing opportunity. I made sure to stay between my fiancé and them as much as possible without making the situation more tense. Turns out, we'd interrupted them smoking crack or meth, which the dude explained they couldn't do at home because of their 3-year-old. They were insanely paranoid and had never met people like us before, and the dude asked me at one point if I was a cop or something. I said no and laughed, and that broke the ice. From then on, they hung out with us until a tow truck arrived and probably kept us safe from the rest of the street walkers who passed us. Though the dude did tell me I should call my insurance, upgrade to the best policy possible and set the car on fire right there. So yeah, crackheads. Camping in the Colorado high country. We were at the far west end of a small campground, the last site at the end. We had 5 kids with us, ages 8 to 12. The kids were bored to tears, so in an effort to keep them occupied, we instituted a firewood collecting competition. They were to go out and find sticks to burn, and see who could collect the biggest pile, so they all went marching off into the woods to find sticks. They had been going back and forth for a while, collecting sticks and piling them up when we heard a blood-curdling scream from the woods to the west. In a fraction of a second, I scanned the campsite and determined that the only kid missing was my son. We had been there all day and I knew no one had gone past our campsite into the woods. That means it's not people, it's an animal. I knew in that instant that a lion had him, and I ran. The most direct path in the direction of the screaming was across a stream bed, and while charging through the stream, I slipped and went down on a river rock, right on my kneecap. A bolt of lightning surged through my leg and I jumped up and ran. I scrambled up the bank and ran through the woods on my shattered knee, fully prepared to do battle with a mountain lion over my child. I burst out onto a river bank and instantly took in two sights. First, my son ambling along, unhurt, on the opposite bank, toting a piece of wood, and, second, a toddler standing in the stream screaming as if he was being murdered. Some family had come down to the river from a road behind the campground that I didn't even know existed, and apparently thought it was amusing to put their toddler in the icy river and listen to him scream. I cycled through relief, shock, disbelief, and fury in the instant before the pain caught up with me, and I fell to the ground and writhed around in agony for a while before finally managing to get up and hobble back to camp. About 10 years ago I went on a 2-day hike through the Scottish Highlands. Beautiful country. We found ourselves pitching our tent by the side of a cliff, not right next to it, perhaps 20 meters from the edge, and at high elevation. It was getting dark quickly, and there wasn't enough time to get ourselves lower down the mountain. It's not safe hiking through the terrain with just flashlights. I woke up in the middle of the night to find the tent rattling like crazy in the winds. My friend was busy securing the corners down with weights. He said something, but I didn't really register it. I thought whatever, and went outside for a piss. Then there was a flash of light, followed by the loudest boom I experienced in my life. I was blown off my feet, backwards. I never experienced a shock like that. Anything like that. Otherworldly. I thought it was lightning at first. It was the Royal Air Force. They spotted our tent and decided to use it as part of their training exercises. The flash of light was a fighter jet, probably a Eurofighter Typhoon or a Panavia Tornado. This is what my mate was trying to tell me. He had experienced this before. My mother used to be an alcoholic. Not violent or anything like that. She was like how that one friend gets like let's bake cookies. When they are paralytic, funny but not a good idea, especially when you have 3 young kids. All of us were under the age of 10 when she spiraled basically. She would become dead weight when she passed out and we would have to pick her up off a table or stop her from falling over. I was young enough to not really know what was going on. My older sister took the brunt of dealing with my mother and my little brother was too young altogether. So a few years pass and we go on a family holiday to France. We go every year and stay in a mobile home/caravan for 2 weeks in a large campsite. I can remember once we had such a shitty caravan right by some bin nests and she slept by the window because she was drunk/hungover most of the holiday. So this year we go to this campsite we never went back to after this. There was a Michael Jackson tribute band playing one night in the center of the campsite, so my mother and little brother go to see it. I think my dad and sister were sick of my mother's shit at this stage and they didn't think she would be able to get drunk at this children's thing. I was a huge Michael Jackson fan at that young age, so I was all in for the performance. I honestly can't remember her drinking, but when the show was over Mom was acting weird. She fought with a barman saying her stole her wallet when I know she didn't bring one, just like 20 euros to get us, or herself, food/drink. There is a straight road for maybe a half a mile, then we filled it right and then we would be inside of our caravan. Me and my brother brought our bikes, so I was slowly going next to my mother as she stumbled along. My brother had grown up a bit and knew we had to mind Mom. Well, we reach a sign and she grabs on to steady herself and falls. She turns as she falls and ends up facing back towards the center with her legs crossed. She starts shouting at the barman stealing again and I begin to really panic. I can't stop her if she takes off running or falls face first and passes out. My brother certainly can't, as she's fighting with her legs to get up. I just turn to my brother and say get Dad. Didn't scream it or anything, but my brother left a cloud of smoke behind him as he took off. I turn back to my mom and she's getting up, with help of the pole. She starts to stumble back towards the center and I need to think of something quickly. France loves their ditches deep right off the road, so I start imagining my mother losing her balance and rolling down into the huge ditch to her left. I doubt even my dad could get her out of that. I get my bike in front of her and try and calmly tell her she left her purse at home. She isn't having it, but before she can freak at me, my dad comes around that bend like Tokyo Drift. He screeches next to us and gets out. I have never been afraid of my dad, but when he looked at my mother then to me and told me to get back to the caravan, I nearly shit myself. I get home and none of my siblings are talking. We all just sit there and wait until my dad pulls She's so drunk her legs had given out at this stage, her into their bedroom and strips her for bed. My mom's been sober for 10 plus years now and we actually joke about her when she was drunk and the weird things she did, like try and make pate one day and take us to the cinema. But I told her how I felt that day when she fell and the laughing stopped. She could remember what happened, or my dad had told her afterwards. Also how she fell asleep one time when I went to the cinema for my birthday because she was hungover. She is so guilty of those days when she could have done something seriously stupid. For all the funny things she did, me and my sister especially have more than 5 not so funny memories of her. That though was the first time I actually could see something terrible happening and panic rising in me instead of having my sister panic and have her deal with it. I was on my own and had to step up. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.